Good afternoon. Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for deciding to spend the next hour and a half in our company. My name is Charlotte Flesche. I'm the coordinator of Rikolto's Global Food Smart Cities program, and I will be your host today. So the purpose of this webinar on resilient cities in practice is to share experiences from city practitioners who have been leveraging the local food policies to tackle both challenges of climate change and social inclusion. The focus will be on concrete practices and strategies, as well as on the lessons that our speakers have learned throughout this process. So hopefully this will be very practice-oriented. So let me remind you that this webinar is co-organized by RUAF and Rikolto as part of the Recipes for Resilience event, which is organized in the margins of COP26 in Glasgow under the leadership of Nourish Scotland. One of my colleagues will be putting the link to the event in the chat. And we warmly encourage you to have a look at the program and to sign up for other events. And we also would like to inform you that the meeting will be recorded, as you probably already heard from the Zoom call. So we have a very exciting program ahead of us with wonderful speakers joining from the UK, from Belgium, from Argentina, and from Madagascar. So after short presentations by the speakers, there will be a panel discussion followed by a Q&A. And so therefore, we really would like to encourage you to send all the questions that you might have in the chat throughout the session. We'll also try to answer some of them directly during the session. And as you may have noticed, we have decided to keep this webinar in a meeting format, basically to encourage a more lively setup for the webinar. So you will not be able to unmute yourself, but you will still be able to send messages to other attendees or panelists as well. So after this first introduction, let me introduce our first speaker, who is Cary from the RUAF Global Partnership on Sustainable Urban Agriculture and Food Systems. Joy will talk to us about the critical importance of integrating foods into climate discussions. Joy has worked on food system sustainability since 1990 and has worked very closely with the FAO, so the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, on developing the city region food system assessment methodology. Very happy to have Joy with us today. Joy, the floor is yours.
Sorry, I'll start again. I think I was on mute. Apologies. So hello, everybody, and thanks, Charlotte. So my role in this session is to set the scene in answer to this question: how can cities leverage their local food policies and initiatives to tackle climate change? So to leverage is to use something, a tool, to maximum advantage, and to use that tool to obtain a desired effect result. So how can cities use their local food policies and collective actions to maximum advantage to tackle climate change? And this is a question that every single city on this planet should be exploring immediately and urgently. Two questions would then follow this first one. So what urban food policies and initiatives can we use? And what does maximum advantage look like? What end results do we want to obtain? Next slide, please. So food is a climate change culprit, and the story is a bit more complex than simply discussing fossil fuels versus renewables. Overall, the global food system is understood to contribute 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. And with certain types of land use practices, it's also responsible for a significant proportion of species extinction. Let's just think a bit more about the role of food in greenhouse gas emissions. So with food, there are 3 main associated greenhouse gases, each with different warming effects. Carbon dioxide we hear a lot about, but there's also methane and there's also nitrous oxide. So let's imagine 5 boxes on top of each other. The top is only half full, that's carbon dioxide. The next box and a half are nitrous oxide, and the lower 2.5 boxes are methane. About half of the agricultural greenhouse gas emissions happen at farm level, but of course this does depend on what types of production methods are being used. And as we all know, ruminant livestock are being discussed. They're the biggest contributor to food-related greenhouse gas emissions for natural reasons, the way their gut works. There is also the use of fossil fuel-based synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, gases from natural manures. Other gas emissions happen indirectly through changed land use, so carbon dioxide released through conversion of other ecosystems into farmlands, for example, forests and wetlands. And then after the farm, there's processing, packaging, transport, storage, again, using energy, single-use plastics, refrigeration. And then after that, again, we need to talk about food waste. Approximately a third of food produced globally is not eaten, estimated to be worth $1 trillion. So food waste and losses contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, both directly and indirectly. Directly, methane through landfill of food and decomposition, indirectly through the other impacts. And the estimated greenhouse gas emissions and water use combined from food waste, food not eaten, is perhaps equivalent to the third, it would be the third highest greenhouse gas emission country in the world. So it's just a really significant culprit. Next slide, please. But there is really good news. Okay, so the agriculture and land-based economy can play a key role in tackling climate change. It is uniquely placed to capture carbon dioxide from the air, to hold water in the soil, to help turn it with the help of farmers into a wide range of foods, fibres and fuels, and at the same time regenerate ecosystems both above the soil and below ground. Next slide, please. Cities are also food culprits. So as communities of people, institutions, businesses, in what we eat unhealthily and unsustainably create and aggressively market, what we purchase, the way we thoughtlessly discard food, in some parts of the world leading to seriously eye-watering levels of insane waste and pollution. But again, there is good news. So cities, as these large communities with their own operational powers, are uniquely placed to change their behaviour and take collective action at scale. Cities all around the world are recognising the importance of engaging with the food agenda for four main reasons. The global food system is contributing not only to serious environmental problems, but also serious social and economic problems which trickle down to the cities. It seems that the city and city region level of intervention is where the most effective change can be made. Food-related health issues have reached crisis point, and cities, on a very positive note, can use food system change as a driver to impact other issues: social inclusion, cohesion, health, economic growth, etc. Next slide, please. How can cities reduce their own carbon footprints and at the same time help farmers, fishers and land managers to restore nature? The Every Mouthful Counts report from Sustain in the UK provides guidance for cities on how to do this and outlines some top priorities for action. And these types of priorities are emerging in similar toolkits and guidance all over the world. So as cities, firstly, we need to publicly acknowledge that there is a nature and climate emergency. Perhaps we're doing better finally this year on that. Then we need to implement change at scale and using key powers that cities have. So we talk about in the 5 Ps: policy, planning, purchasing and procurement, partnerships, participation. We can support farmers and food providers to make the changes that they're uniquely placed to make by providing them with a market for healthy and sustainable food and putting our money behind our talk. So through mechanisms of procurement policy, catering contracts, local market legislation, investment in infrastructure that will support short supply chains. We have to design out food waste, adopting that circular approach to use waste as a resource and really see it as a resource. And we need to make really good use of urban planning policies, parks, green spaces, clean air and water strategies, all of those things that help to use land well for climate and nature, while also addressing social inclusion, for example, through initiatives like urban agriculture. And importantly, we also need to keep track of the progress that we're making by measuring what matters. Next slide, please. The key element of the context of today's session is the Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration. So this is a call for national governments to recognise that subnational governments are leading the way by adopting integrated food policies. It's also a call for everyone to recognise both the need and the opportunity to place food and local action at the heart of the global response to the climate emergency. Next slide, please. Subnational governments around the world are committing to tackle the climate emergency through integrated food policy, and they really need the support of national governments to enable them to have greater impact. The key point here is that we need a whole food system approach, and that we need to support innovation and change that is occurring both at a local and a regional level. Next slide, please. Finally, I want to mention some practical resources. So as cities and as city regions, we need to do what is in our power to reduce the harmful impacts of the global food system, but also to understand the impact that climate change and other shocks like pandemic will have on the resilience of our food systems. So RUAF, with partners, Rikolto, FAO and others, are creating practical resources for cities to help them do more and better and quicker. Soon to be published will be a source book on urban agriculture and planning. And the slide here has two that I wanted to mention. The Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, which is a network of cities around the world, calls for cities to take action on food together as a global network. And the monitoring framework includes recommended actions for cities with practical guidance on how to track progress. All of these documents are freely available to download. And keep an eye out for our forthcoming city region food system toolkit. So this is guidance, tools, mechanisms for assessing the sustainability and resilience of the wider city region food system, taking into account both rural and urban aspects. Thank you very much. Back to you, Charlotte.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Joy. And I really like your top priorities for action. And actually, I think we will see in the presentations of the next speakers that these entry points come back quite often in the local food policies. So thank you very much for the fantastic introduction. And I would like to invite now our next speaker, which is Thibaut Girardin. He's a food strategy facilitator for Leuven 2030. Leuven 2030 is actually a non-profit that represents over 600 organizations in the Belgian city of Leuven. And this includes also the municipality in this group. And the Leuven 2030 is actually working towards a climate neutral Leuven. Thibaut also happens to work for Rikolto on the Belgian Food Smart Cities program. And his presentation will talk about how the city of Leuven is implementing its food strategy through innovative food sourcing models. I'm not going to say more. The floor is yours, Thibaut.
Thank you, Charlotte. And hi, everyone. I am going to talk shortly about Leuven, our food strategy, and our model for a short chain food distribution platform. First of all, Leuven is a fairly small city. We have more or less 100,000 inhabitants, and because of its university, it is also home to an extra 50,000 students. You can see the red flag there on the map. It's very close to Brussels. But more interestingly, in 2018, a dynamic started, which resulted in our food strategy called Food Connects. It is the beginning and the basis of a framework for the city to work on sustainable and healthy food as a system. Next slide, please. So as I said, in 2018, we co-created a food strategy with more or less 70 stakeholders, ranging from consumers to farmers, civil society organizations, businesses, and the administration. The idea was really to create a collective framework, translated into several strategic goals, tackling challenges like knowledge, land use, innovation, sustainable farming, food waste, access to food, so really a systemic view. And also link actions that implement these strategies. There were several outcomes to that process and the resulting framework, and one of them is that our local administration recognized this and integrated the food strategy in their policy plans for the coming years. Another important outcome was that the process created a network of local stakeholders that now have shared goals, are better connected, and also eager to contribute to the strategy. And all of this also resulted in the integration of the food strategy and the roadmap to climate neutrality for the city of Leuven by 2030. So next to energy, housing, mobility, etc., there's a full program on healthy and sustainable food with clear KPIs and timings. And these KPIs range from reducing household food waste to making public farmland available for innovative farmers and many others. But there's one in particular I'd like to talk to you about more in depth. Next slide, please. And that is our local food distribution platform called Kortom Leuven. It was really a missing element in Leuven, such a platform. And so it was an important goal of the strategy. We wanted to connect local farmers directly to consumption in the city, and also wanted to experiment with a B2B model. So targeting retail and food service, different than the many existing B2C platforms who are also present here in Leuven. We started in 2019 with a project to investigate and implement that concept, also with contributions from local stakeholders. And by mid-2020, 10 farmers had started an independent business, joining forces to make an attractive offer to local businesses. And so today, a bit more than a year later, 5 more farmers have joined, and the platform has 21 customers, of which 90% are retailers in and around Leuven. Our local government also saw an opportunity to play a role in this and help the startup of Kortom Leuven. So they subsidized the project phase partly, and now also own shares of the cooperative. But to keep ownership with the farmers, only farmers have a seat in the board. Next slide, please. So what has Kortom, our local distribution platform, achieved in this short period? First of all, it's interesting to say that the cooperative is more or less break even today, which shows a real economic potential. Not that long ago, we did a social return on investment evaluation. For those who don't know what that is, it's an evaluation that not only takes into account economic parameters, but also social and ecologic dimensions. These dimensions are then translated into an economic value. For example, the price of 1 ton CO2 is more or less 40 euros today, I think. So in all, it's a very complex thing to do, but here are some insights from the report. The main beneficial outcomes for farmers are that they are helped with their market access and the diversification of their income. They have more price ownership and ownership in general of their operations and sales. And also via storytelling, Kortom restores the lost connection between the farmers and their customers. For the consumers, well, it's evident that their access to local seasonal food became easier, and they got to reconnect with their food and food production in general. They can also support their local economy and pursue other ethical consumer needs. And then in general, but this is still theoretical because it's very hard to prove, but short food supply chains stimulate innovation, reduce transport and pollution, improve diets, etc. In the end, Kortom got the social return of investment ratio of 1.8, which means that every euro invested results in 1.8 euro return in economic, social, and ecological value, which is quite a good result compared to other similar studies, considering only a short period of operations. But it's not all positive, of course. The evaluation was also very clear on how to increase that ratio by focusing more on ecological dimensions, things like packaging, logistics, food waste. These are areas where a lot of progress can still be made, and some of them are low-hanging fruit, but we are aware of that. But that's also linked to one of the lessons learned I wanted to share with you today. Focus on the economic business model first. It is a necessary basis to work on other climate and sustainability issues. It's something I think these local or niche platforms often struggle with. Kortom was also conceptualized with a climate neutral logistics system, with support for farmers to implement more sustainable practices and to work on food waste, for example, at the farm level, but without proving there is a sustainable economic model in it. It will be very hard to work on the added value of social and ecological sustainability. But now in Leuven, we have reached more or less that point of the break-even scenario, so we can start working on that, which brings me to my last slides. That's the next step. So we are preparing our next project or phase in this food strategy for local food distribution, and that will be implemented mid-next year. So from local food distribution, we want to grow towards a circular food hub in Leuven, connecting all the stakeholders on the left-hand side you see there. So retailers, the farmers, consumers, vulnerable groups, and social entrepreneurs, to work on shared goals and challenges, such as the redistribution and the processing of food surpluses, the distribution or growing the distribution of local produce, working together on innovations in relation to packaging, for example, and something that will be, or a lever to make it all possible, will be a consolidated and very efficient logistic system, of course. Next slide. Voilà, I think those were more or less my 10 minutes. Thank you for listening. I hope it was interesting. And if you want to have a more in-depth conversation, feel free to reach out. Back to you, Charlotte.
Great, thank you. Wonderful, Thibaut. And great to see also so much engagement and energy in Leuven around the food strategy, and also the implementation of the food strategy through these very concrete examples. Like you mentioned, Kortom, there's a circular food hub happening, and there's obviously lots of other things that couldn't be included in this presentation. But I think it's really exciting to see what is happening, and I'm quite curious to see where Leuven will be in the next few years. So thank you very much, Thibaut. Let me now welcome Daniela Mastrangelo and Raúl Terile from the municipality of Rosario in Argentina. Raúl is a coordinator of the city's food program, and Daniela is a technical coordinator at the Secretariat of Environment and Public Space. They have prepared this presentation together, and even though it will be Daniela who will be presenting the presentation, both will be available to answer any questions that might come up. Thank you both for accepting our invitation. Daniela, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Charlotte. Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to share our experience in Rosario City in relation to urban and peri-urban agriculture. The next one, please. At first, it's important to remark that the agroecological food production in Rosario started in 2002, the urban agriculture program, as a response to the economic crisis in 2001 in Argentina, improve food security and nutrition for low-income residents. Then, in 2013, some academic researchers started to identify, measure, and quantify indicators about the impact of urban agriculture in relation to climate change. Then we could see the urban agriculture as a climate change strategy. Then in 2016, Rosario extended the project to the peri-urban areas with Green Belt project. And in 2020, we included this experience, this policy in our climate action plan. The next. The objectives of these policies are to promote the urban and peri-urban areas sustainable food production system, promote income generation and social inclusion of vulnerable families, guarantee access to healthy food, provide environmental service to hold the city, and mobilize the local economy. The next, please. One of the most important aspects upon this kind of policies is the land preservation. We protected spaces for urban agriculture through urban planning regulation. Those spaces were identified in participative process in public non-buildable places inside the city like this you can see in the picture near the road. It's important to see the land valorization. You can see the situation after and before, and the changes in the landscape that this kind of policies allow. The next one, please. Therefore, there are not urbanizable areas in the surrounding the city protected for food production. Those are 800 hectares of private land, which its use is restricted by the local regulation, are exclusive for food production for agriculture. The next one, please. Thank you. Our strategies for farmer empowerment are technical assistance. Actually, this is an exchange of knowledge with the farmers who have a lot of knowledge in relation to the agriculture, and to financial assistance, sales opportunity with markets and other actions, added value for the production and social and economical inclusion. The next. In relation to the commercialization, we promote the responsible consumption with local markets, short distribution chain, direct sales producer consumers, trade shows in different points of the city. The next, please. At the present, we have 126 hectares in agroecological production and 157 in agroecological transition. These are cases of farmers who started to change their practices. They started to use biological products instead of chemical products, and they are changing gradually their production techniques. For that, they are in agroecological transition. We have 381 producers involved in the program, and with 65% of them are women. And at the present, we have 6,300 tons of agroecological food per year. The next, please. In relation to the commercialization, we have 44 municipal agroecological market points in the city. Every day you can buy agroecological food in any point of the city. We have a permanent point of commercialization and one agroecological research center. Next, please. In relation to the climate change impact of these policies, obviously it allowed CO2 capture, organic waste recycled for compost, biodiversity and landscape preservation, dirt reduction for use of biological products instead of chemical products, flooding protection. In relation to flooding protection, there is investigation of researchers of the local universities that show the rainfall infiltration may be 3.6 times bigger in agroecological handled soil than soil managed conventionally with many years of soya production. Next, please. And in another climate change tools, the head Iceland effect mitigation, there is investigations too that shows temperature in the urban gardens are lower than in an urban area by 8.1 degrees in summer maximums. The investigators make measures and they this kind of result. And in relation to CO2 emissions, in relation to food transport, they determined that that would be reducing between 94 and 98% per year. Next, please. You can see one of the cases of the reduce for transport, the case of potatoes. The next. And the temperature measurements made in the city. The next. And finally, in relation to our lessons learned, we state that the process may be participative and involve many stakeholders of different sectors, making networks, and we have to valorize the farming knowledge too, and the municipality have to technical capacity in the staff, the social appropriation, the sustained policies of promotion in the municipality policies, and the importance of local regulations for the continuity of this kind of actions in relation to the use of land, different programs creation, restriction on the use of agrochemical products, and the interdepartmental approach. We are manage this kind of policies in relation many secretaries of the municipality: economic development, human development, environmental health, urban planning. The next. Okay, this is all. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much, Daniela. It's honestly quite impressive to see the results that you have achieved in Rosario and the scale also of what you are doing. What is it? 126 hectares of agroecological fields, 157 in conversion, and then also quite impressive to see the reduction in temperature thanks to these urban gardens. You can really see the very concrete impact that urban agriculture can have on climate change in the city. So thank you very much for sharing this experience, and we'll get back to you also during the panel discussion. Great, so our next speaker will be Tokiana Rakotoni-Raini and Carmen Zuleta Ferrari. Tokiana is Food Policy Coordinator at the municipality of Antananarivo in Madagascar. He's also a member of the Milan Pact Steering Committee. And Carmen is an urban food system and resilience specialist at the FAO. Both have worked together to put the city region food system tool in practice in the city of Antananarivo. And as for our previous speakers from Rosario, they've also prepared the presentation together, and they will both be available to answer questions later. So Tokiana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, for that introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So I will go directly to the next slide, please. So basically for Antananarivo, it's basically the capital city of Madagascar, and the agglomeration is around 823 square kilometers with a population of 2.5 million in 2018, which is basically around 10% of the national population. And 50% of the urban population is located in this agglomeration. The plan, which covers the capital and its peripheries, favor the activities of cultures and farming for many households, and it represents around 45%. Almost 75% of the household activities revolve around the urban agriculture and food system. 20% of households are farmers in Antananarivo. And for the city region food system, it includes 65 municipalities surrounding the urban area of Antananarivo. So it includes the peri-urban, suburban population. This area supplies the capital city in Madagascar, And for the city-region food system boundary, it is based on the inter-municipal cooperation, future urban master plan projections for the 2035, and also for the potential agricultural economy and food industry of the country. Next slide, please. So basically, Madagascar is among the 10 high-risk countries from climate shocks and stresses, and the capital city is prone to flooding and landslides during the rainy season. Also, we are facing a drought, heat wave, and water shortage during the summer. So the island is also facing a continuous threat from cyclones and hurricane every year. One of the major issues in our country right now is the bushfire initiated by locals in order to have a more cultivable area in the region. Next slide, please. So as represented in this next slide, we can see with bright pink, the localization of the city and the urban and peri-urban area who are providing like a source of food for the capital city. So due to the localization of the city, there is a strong interconnection between the neighboring municipalities, and we can also see the level of vulnerabilities that these areas are facing. It's also important to mention that these municipalities are among the most productive compared to the other regions of Madagascar. Next slide, please. So the city has been working on multiple food system activities since 2011 with the low space, no space, which is the division of micro gardens in poor neighborhoods through urban agriculture. And in 2017, we've been engaged in the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, or MUFPP, and the City Food Global Network. But in 2019, we boosted these activities through the use of the monitoring framework that Joy mentioned early in the presentation, which is in partnership with FAO, RUAF, and Laurier University. So the outcome of these activities are the initiation of indicators that accounts for data, prioritization of activities, and action planning. It basically integrates the MUFPP activities as an inter-department activity in the municipality, like for example, the Economic Development Department, the Urban Agriculture Service, and the Direction of International Cooperation and Partnership, where I work. This also reassembled a multi-stakeholder group of actors, and Antananarivo becomes a city of reference for Madagascar in terms of local food policy in order to ensure the system resilience and access to healthy, affordable, sustainable, and culturally acceptable food. Next slide, please. So the city region food system is basically a food strategy for the city, where we are strengthening partnership for access of the vulnerable population to healthy food, like through school gardens, for example. We are planning and implementing 9 pilot projects in the primary schools right now. There is also vegetable gardens in our social centers of the municipality. We are providing technical support for 1 orphan centers. And there is also launching of a mobile application called I Cultivate to diffuse the urban agriculture practices within urban farmers and youth generations. And as mentioned in the introduction, Antananarivo is part of a steering committee representing the African region in the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. There is also 2 initiatives, the Green Cities Initiative by FAO as a showcase of actions and planning to improve resilience and the city region food system of a resilient food system to tackle climate stresses and shocks. Next slide, please. So on the city region food system, we are strengthening the climate resilience of food system in the urban region area through 4 components, which is multi-stakeholder engagement, multi-level governance, comprehensive climate risk assessment, development of policy and strategy on climate resilience. And last one is the capacity development of vulnerable stakeholders in the climate resilience good practices related to the city region food systems. So on this slide, it is shown the stakeholders, the internal partners and external partners of a city in order to launch this strategy and food planning for the food systems in Antananarivo. Next slide, please. So the stakeholder advisory group are working closely in order to implement one vision for the city based on the city's lead for the activity on the food systems. So the MUFPP stakeholders engagement use the monitoring framework as a basis of the implementation of the activities of a city region food system, and also to ensure the consistency of actions and create a synergy between actors and create multiple responses mechanism for the data sharing and establish common indicators. Next slide, please. So for the result of these activities and the lesson learned, these activities are basically linkages between the strategy, actions regarding the food system climate and climate resilience with the stakeholders. It's also an improvement of the coordination between actors from the food systems, like for example, data collection and the sharing of information through cross-sectorial engagement and vertical integration with the regional government and the central government. So basically, the lesson learned from the city is the link to people and the key actors who knows how to do their work on the food system, and also to engage more in order to share the same vision for the food system in Antananarivo. Next slide. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Tokiana, for this very interesting presentation, and also finishing on emphasizing once again the importance of having this shared vision for the city, for the city region's food system, because I think that's a really key issue. And yeah, you also mentioned some interesting things related to vertical integration and also the role that Antananarivo plays as a bit of a champion city in Madagascar. So I hope in the discussion later we can come back to how you play this role also of sharing your experience with other cities in Madagascar. And also I wanted to emphasize and to say that Antananarivo signed the Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration, and that you will be sharing a testimonial also during the official launch of the declaration next Saturday. So that's quite exciting to see all these experiences going to the global level as well. So thanks again to you, Tokiana, and also to Carmen for preparing the presentation, but also to all the other wonderful speakers we had today who have shared very inspiring examples of how their cities are tackling the climate crisis through local food policies, local food actions. We already received a few questions in the chat, and I already invite our speakers to answer them if they are able to. Otherwise, we will come back to that later in the discussion. So please keep sending those questions. We will get to them. But before that, we would like to have a short discussion with the panelists. And the first question that we would like to ask them is, what triggered your city to take action on climate change through food? What were the first steps that you took? And I would like to ask Tokiana first to answer that question.
Yeah, thanks again, Charlotte, for that question. So, as I mentioned in my presentation, basically, we started out with the use of the MUFPP monitoring framework as a basis for the stakeholder engagement in the city. So, through the use of these tools, we started to have more interest from the stakeholders in the activities of food system. So then we started to have the reinforcement of climate resilience of our strategy through the stakeholders engagement, and also reinforcing the climate resilience through the city's strategy based on the vulnerable population recovery and increasing the food strategy to tackle the vulnerability of this population in terms of food. So food was the key asset to be addressed for the city, because right now we have high rates of malnutrition, especially in the children. So we have to reinforce for strategy in order to establish more of like a shared process for a common vision in order to have more resilient food system, and also to tackle the climate risk and shock that I have mentioned in my presentation, and also to boost the income generating action of the population. So this decision has been confirmed during the COVID-19, because there is a high risk related to the pandemic. So these activities were more welcomed from the vulnerable population, because it did give them more source of income, like from, for example, the setting of urban agriculture in the schools and in the community gardens. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Tokiana. It's interesting also to see the impact that the pandemic has had on kind of scaling up some of those initiatives. I would like to ask Carmen if she would like to add anything about the work in Tana.
No, I think that it's Toki just, I mean, filled in everything that was needed to say. I think that the process was, really well handled by the city of Antananarivo. We just, as FAO, we proposed just some guidance, technical guidance, and they just developed what was being done locally. So I think that is one of the most important values of this process, is like we using guidance and tool and technical tools, but then really learning from what the city has as a real capacity to develop by themselves. So I guess this is one of the most important values of this kind of processes. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, it's exactly building on what is already alive, what is already there. I think that's a good tip. Let's ask maybe Daniela and Raul. Maybe Daniela first.
Thank you, Charlotte. Okay, actually, the urban program agriculture began as a social policy, as a response to social and economic crisis. But after that, when the benefit of its implementation were evident, we consolidated and expanded its scope. We included in our climate strategies, because the urban politics, urban agriculture policies prevent green areas, shops, absorbent surface, food safety, etc. The first steps were related to identify vacant land, involving to urban planning department of municipality, involving people interested in farming of the city and having previous knowledge. Then the police was included in the urban plans of the city. This is an important aspect to continuity of this program. But the first step were related to the identify vacant land and protect it.
Thank you, Daniela. And I think what you mentioned, the fact that this is integrated in the urban plan, really helps institutionalize this urban agriculture practice.
After that, in the climate change plan now.
Yeah, great. Good. I would like to give also Raúl the opportunity to comment. So Raúl will be speaking in Spanish, but there will be an immediate translation right afterwards. So Raúl, if you would like to come in, you're welcome to do so.
Hola, buenos días. Fortalecer lo que dice Daniela, de que creo que es importante que todo el trabajo de tanto de la agricultura urbana como periurbana sea integrado a los planes de la planificación del suelo y protección del suelo y incorporar lo que es la infraestructura verde a la planificación de la ciudad.
What Raúl wants to say is important to reinforce the protection of the green and to integrate the peri-urban and the city, the infrastructure of the city and the outskirts. That is.
Great. Is there more?
Yes.
To say? I felt like Raúl wanted to say something else, but I'm not sure.
¿Quieres decir algo más?
En esto ha sido importante respondiendo a algunas preguntas, responder a la inclusión social y a todos los servicios ambientales que se fueron visualizando en la ciudad, y esto ha sido que ha incorporado a muchos productoras a un circuito de economía social, de inclusión social, que ha posibilitado que muchas familias puedan generar sus propios ingresos y al mismo tiempo mejorar la salud de la ciudad y de los cuidados digamos, de los espacios que tiene la ciudad.
He says that it's very important, the social inclusion, and it was very important for families to live through this.
No, and thank you for emphasizing also this element of social inclusion. It's very important indeed. Yeah. Great. So we'll maybe ask Thibaut now to answer the question. What were the first steps that you took, and what triggered the city of Leuven to start this process?
Well, first of all, I think it was already high on the agenda in Leuven with a progressive government. It's also the home to the biggest farmers union, and we have a big university which attracts a lot of international talent into the city. So it was high on the agenda. And then the second step came actually from civil society, from some main stakeholders who made a case towards our local government why a food strategy is important and what they would need to start that process. And so the local government supported that idea and the proposal, and so the process was started.
Great, thank you. Sometimes you need the political push, sometimes you need the grassroots. It's very, very different depending on each city, but again, build on what is alive in your city, I guess, is a good tip. All right, second question for the panel, and then after the second question, we'll move to the questions from the audience. So what were the main challenges that you faced throughout your journey, and how did you overcome them as well? Maybe we'll start with Daniela and afterwards Raúl.
Thank you. The main challenge was keeping on the policy through different governments in 20 years. No? The program started in 2002. Also, we had always the political support because the political project was the same in this period in our city. The change of the priorities and in the people taking decision was a permanent challenge for the continuity. And the key from it was the social appropriation of the project by academic, consumers, environmental owned NGOs, farmers, and the technical staff with commitment and continuity. This is what the key from this kind of challenge of the changes of the the political head in the city. And another challenge was the pressure of urbanization is a reality in our cities. The stakeholders involved in urbanization business is a big challenge. And the social appropriation and the inclusion of this kind of policies in the strategic plans of the city were important tools for affront it.
Sí, creo que también el principal desafío ahora es aumentar la escala de producción y de consumo, conformar una red de consumidores agroecológicos y poder trabajar a nivel de áreas metropolitanas de región, de manera de poder bueno, promover y fomentar todo lo que es el alimento sano a nivel de región, de Rosario.
Sí, que querían aumentar
la escala de producción.
Currently, the main challenge is to improve the scale of production
A nivel de región.
in the regional level.
Thank you. And actually that maybe allows me to link to one of the questions that came up in the chat already. And the question was, in Rosario, is this model of urban and peri-urban agriculture commercially viable? And I think that connects to this issue of scale that Raúl mentioned.
Pregunta que te hicieron, ¿es viable en Rosario?
Sí, creemos que sí que es viable en la medida de que quienes están incluidos en este proceso de agricultura urbana y periurbana viven de esta actividad más de 300 productores, productoras. Hay un vínculo directo entre productor y consumidor y cada vez se va expandiendo más a más puntos de ventas en ferias y en espacios permanentes.
Actually, yes, it's viable, and farmers, around 300 farmers lived through this in the last years, and is being improved.
No, thank you. And if you also said that the markets are expanding and that the network is growing. So that is an indication that it is an attractive business for the farmers themselves. So thank you for pointing that out. I will now go back to Thibaut from Leuven to ask him the same question about what were the main challenges and how did you overcome them if you managed to do so?
There are, of course, many challenges, but to name one, and it was also mentioned by Daniela and Tokiana, is the Inter-Departmental Collaboration, because it's always a struggle to find budgets to stimulate innovation within the local government. And usually a food strategy or food in general, agriculture sits with one department. But actually you can link food to almost every department. And if you can make that connection with the goals of every department, you can also consolidate more budgets or pool budgets to achieve more. So finding the right connections with your colleagues internally, I think is a very important lesson learned and something to invest time in.
Maybe something a little bit counterintuitive maybe is that it's not only about the professional relationships. I think from our experience, at least at Rikolto, we felt that also building more personal relationships between the different people in the department, creating trust on a human level is sometimes also a big prerequisite, getting people together to talk and build trust. Thank you, Thibaut. And then the same question for Tokiana as well. What were the challenges and how did you overcome them?
Yes, so one of the main challenges that Antananarivo faced in this journey was I would say, the lack of resources, whether it's human resources or financial resources or material, because the municipality itself does not have a specified budget on the activities on food systems. And also we do not have enough personnel to work on the specific activities or specific strategy on the food system. But I would say that in order to overcome these challenges, we reinforce our cooperation and the partnership with the stakeholders, because we cannot do everything alone. We have to do it together with the stakeholders. So for us, it was important to create a synergy with these stakeholders in order to support the creation of kind of like coalitions of actions, and in order to minimize the costs and resources, and also to boost the common vision in the food system. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Tokiana. I think you're highlighting some key aspects of the food systems approach here, with the focus on synergies and also on coalitions and building a shared vision. Yeah, I think that all very important points. Carmen, would you like to complement this?
Yes, I think that is one of the key challenges that Antananarivo confronted. I think that one of the challenges is what is being mentioned in the chat, actually, how cities can be supported by their national governments, by the national strategies. And I'm thinking, in the case of Antananarivo, what we confronted, as well as many other cities confront, is this lack of institutional tools to really protect all these initiatives. Especially related to, for example, bylaws, the lack of rules that are able for the cities. And in the case of Antananarivo, and I think that the case of many other cities is the same, is that when we go to the rules that and the frameworks, the existing frameworks for cities, we always go to the national tools and the national rules that really organize the territory and the land. So cities become kind of vulnerable, because if there's something which is decided at the national level, then the rules that the city has to apply, they don't belong to their field of action. So this lack of coherence between what the city is proposing as actions and what the local capacity is able to do, there is a sort of a mismatch with the real framework which is going on and which really takes the decisions about what's the future for these cities. So that I think is one of the most important challenges. So really supporting cities to develop their own frameworks in relationship with the national and regional frameworks. And that is what, with the city region food system approach, we can really facilitate is this dialogue between the planning vision for the local level and for the regional and national levels, so that this vision becomes a common one. And including these stakeholders is really, really important in order to put some pressure on this development of frameworks. Over to you.
No, thank you, Carmen. And that's interesting, because we mentioned a few times already this Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration, and this is actually what this declaration is asking for, is to increase this collaboration between national and local level, and to support from the national level these initiatives happening in cities, for example. So actually this is a good transition with the Q&A part of the session. And you already started answering that question, Carmen. Thank you very much for that. But let me ask a question that comes from John Drowley in the chat. His question to each of the city representatives is the following. So what action would you like your national government to take to support and assist what you are doing in your city? Let's start maybe with Thibaut this time.
I think there are a lot of, in Belgium at least, a lot of challenges with legislations. For example, if you want to make a circular food hub, it is prohibited to combine food surpluses and fresh food and other elements in one hub or physical location, which makes it very difficult to really work on a circular food system in your city. So I think national governments need to put out their tentacles, hear about these issues, these practical issues, and then adapt to legislation.
Thank you, Thibaut. And I'll address the same question now to Daniela and Raoul as well. Tell me if you want me to repeat the question.
I think we need obviously support in regulatory in the national framework, as Carmen said before, and we need funds too, because we need money for support the agricultures in the change. We are working in the change to agroecological model, and all the system in the market, in the macro policies too, is oriented in another model of production, not in agroecological model. And we need alignate the policies in the national level and the local level. I think regulatory and funding support is to concrete aspect to help the cities to accelerate this process.
Yeah.
No, como algo promisorio, una actividad promisoria es que existe una Dirección Nacional de Agroecología a nivel de ciudad que ha promovido municipios que fomentan la agroecología. Se ha conformado una red que incipientemente hace muy poco han empezado a promover todo lo que es prácticas y políticas agroecológicas.
Hi, Raúl says that recently there is a national networks that supports agroecological issues.
And so that local network also helps to create this link, I guess, between the two levels and to help promote agroecological production in the city.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. So Carmen already kind of answered that question from the perspective of Tana, but I still want to hear also what Tokiana has to say.
Yes. So basically, as mentioned in the chat already, for the case of Antananarivo, the city region food system already includes the vertical integration, like for example, the region of Analamanga and the national government through the regional direction of which works on the food system, like the agriculture department. So basically, what the local governments are I mean, like for example, for the Antananarivo, we will be very thrilled if the national government can support us through our activities, like for example, facilitating the interdependency of the peri-urban and urban area, like for example, facilitation of the legislation that takes care of transport, for example, which are not in our halls in the municipality, but in the national government. Because, for example, most of the time, the transport industry are complaining within the municipality that the taxes are very high, and the municipality cannot do anything about it because it's not in our department who takes care of that, but national government. So that kind of facilitation is what we are waiting from the national government. So.
No, thank you very much, Tokiana, for sharing your perspective. And I also want to maybe read one of the answers that was given in the chat, because I think it's quite interesting. So it's an answer that was given by Jess Halliday from RUAF, who will actually do the closing remarks later. She said, that support from national governments can be quite context specific, and that ideally national governments would acknowledge actions that are taken by cities and assess their effectiveness and see what they can do to support scaling up and exchanges and replication, either through capacity building or financially as well. And this is maybe something that's not happening yet at the moment. But that also they play a role in identifying which are the barriers that exist in different policy areas that come from the national level. So also looking at their own policies and see, to what extent are they hampering action at the local level, to make sure that this can enable more effective work closer to the population. So thanks, Jess. I think that was a very good answer that I also wanted to emphasize. So thank you for this. Then we have also another question in the chat, asking the three speakers from the cities here, how many of the city region food systems use an independent broker to work between governments, businesses, and community? In my experience, government officials struggle to engage and gain trust. So how do you deal with this issue of having a neutral facilitator that everybody can trust? Let's start maybe with Daniela and Raul.
In our case, was the municipality, the local public policies who mobilize the interaction between different actors. It's really hard work to build trust and commitment. And for that, we result the importance to have public municipal staff of technicals people with commitment who can support the continuity of the policy every year and against the different challenge and the different moments when probably the policy haven't got a big support for these kind of policies. The technical staff were very important to defend this kind of policies. And the social commitment to social appropriation, another actor in the city, the academic stakeholders was very important in our process because the university sustained their researches and studies in relation to this kind of policies and their impact, and this is very, very important. Then in our case was the municipality and the continuity of the public policy who make the network between the different stakeholders.
Great, thank you, Daniela. And I think this is also what Thibaut mentioned before, also the role of academia, but we'll get to that later. Maybe Raul, would you like to comment or complement on this point about the neutral facilitator?
Sí, me parece importante también destacar el de contar con un marco institucional y normativo de leyes locales que también promueven, apoyan la producción local de alimentos. Así que bueno, destacar y que los temas ambientales forman parte de la agenda política y que son valorados más allá de las variables económicas.
What Raul says is that he thinks it's important the support of the municipality and the laws that value the environment issues that can be improved and all this.
Thank you, Raul, for bringing also this environmental aspect in the discussion. Actually, maybe Joy, I saw you answered this question in the chat already, and although you're not connected, I mean, in this webinar to a particular city, I think you've got some interesting things to say about this question. Do you want to come in as well?
Keep going, Charlotte, because I think it's much more important to hear from the cities, to be honest.
Great. Okay.
Thanks.
No Thibaut, maybe would you like to come in?
Yeah, I think it's very important to have a neutral facilitator of these processes. Like Joy answered in the chat, to not have one single agenda in mind, but have all the agendas in mind and find the common denominator amongst all the agendas, and also to how can I say this? It can strengthen the case you make in your own organization as a civil servant or as someone from a company or whatever. So yeah, I think it's super important to have a neutral facilitator.
Can you explain what you mean by strengthening the case internally?
If you make a case in which a lot of your stakeholders are behind that case, I mean, if they believe in it, if there's like a societal consensus, it makes a stronger case than one person who believes in something.
Great, yeah, of course. Thank you, Thibaut. Asking also colleagues from TANA, Tatiana and Carmen, would you like to comment?
Yes, so basically that question really answers what the city was thinking about when we tried to implement the cross-sectorial engagement of the stakeholders in the city. So basically we were trying to implement like a food policy council within the city in order to tackle the climate resilience of a food system. So basically, we are right now we are trying to reinforce first the engagement of for stakeholders, because in the stakeholders of food system in the city, we are including like civil society, university, like people working on the food system, like the transportation, production. So we are trying to include all of us stakeholders in the processes, as I mentioned in the presentation, in order to have a common vision first, but also to minimize the resources and to have more like work together on something instead of working on each way. So I think that's one of the points for the Antananarivo.
Thank you, Tatiana. Carmen, would you like to comment?
Yes, I think that this is a great example, what Antananarivo has done, and the fact of, I think that neutral actors are really important to keep this, neutral vision, but the involvement of the city, especially the technical civil servants, it's really, really interesting. The fact, I know it's difficult because there's a lot of bureaucratic burden. It's not that easy, but I think that in the long term, if you want to tackle the transitions, the political transitions in the different municipalities, it's really important to try to associate these technical teams into the process. This is what happened in Antananarivo. I think that the key asset was having the technical civil servants engaged, because then there were political transitions. The mayor changed, and the stakeholders, from the civil society, from the private sector, were expecting to have, to gain this confidence again. And the technical civil servants were the one who really defended these interests when confronting the new mayors. So I think that this is really important. It's important to have both, I think. Thank you.
Great. I think that's a good conclusion, really having this mix of more technical staff that are attached to the administration, and then also the political support, because that's what gets budgets moving and decisions being taken as well. So we don't have that much time left. What I would like to do before we move to the closing remarks is maybe ask each one of you in one sentence, what recommendations would you give to other cities who would like to start a local food transformation trajectory in your city? I said one sentence, but we still have a bit of time. So if you want to elaborate a bit more, you're welcome to do so. So what recommendations would you give to other cities who want to start a local food transformation trajectory in their city? Let's start maybe with Daniela and Raul.
Thank you. We recommend to start doing in low scale, with low definition, but do legitimize, and then finally to general regulation. No wait for the regulation to start to do. We haven't got time. The climate change is here now. Protect the land for the agriculture in the city. This is the key, the most important key. If we haven't got land, we will do agriculture.
Great. So protect the land and don't wait for the regulation. Don't be scared to start small. Thank you. Great. Raúl, would you like to add, or you're happy with this?
Sí, la importancia en la planificación de la ciudad, que un poco, como decía Daniela, de promover suelo para la producción de alimento y protegerlo, generar infraestructura verde, y bueno, y las políticas continuas que promuevan la producción de alimento en las ciudades.
Raúl says it is important to protect the land and the support of municipalities to promote this.
Thank you very much. And also, I think the element of green infrastructure, investing in green infrastructure, I think is quite important, as you said. Maybe Thibaut?
Yeah, very shortly, I would say build your local ecosystem, create shared ownership amongst the stakeholders in your city, and act as a facilitator and stimulate collaboration. And maybe also the transition of a food system is incredibly complex, and if you try one thing, you might do something bad on another criteria. So it's always experimenting, evaluating, and adapting.
Very good summary. Experimenting, evaluating, adapting, and as you said, being very much aware of the trade-offs that exist between different areas of the food systems. Progress in one area might actually create some negative unintended consequences in another. So very good. Great. How about Carmen and Tokiana?
Yes, thank you. So as my presentation was about the city region food system, I would like to encourage other cities to use these tools from the FAO city region food system, because it's like an approach to support cities in order to develop more like participatory processes in order to understand the city region food system, but also it's kind of a tools to enhance the resilience of a food system in the cities and also in the region, not just the city, but the region, and in order to develop and monitor specific framework of actions. So that's it.
Great. So really this approach also at the regional level, city region level, not just the city itself, and then the importance of monitoring. Thanks, Carmen.
Yes, and I will add something which maybe might be difficult, but is to produce reliable monitoring tools. And this is something that really is really needed to try to influence national, regional, and local indicators to really include food as one of the things to measure and rely on. And I think we are a little far there. We needed still a little more work, but create reliable ways of sharing this information and sharing data between people. That is, I mean, data is all. I mean, if it's data, we will have we will know the capacity we actually have to do something. So create reliable ways of sharing this data.
Great, and I think Thibaut shared an interesting tool in the chat, the Eco Food Map of Leuven, which basically compiles a series of indicators and the values of these indicators in a map of the city. I think that's one way of trying to get this information out there and to use it also for decision making. But thank you very much, Carmen, for pointing that out. And I think we'll close the Q&A here. I will now pass the floor to Jess Halliday from RUAF for the closing remarks. So Jess is actually a lead consultant on the Resilient City Region Food System. program, and her expertise ranges from food environments to gender, inclusion, multi-stakeholder governance. She's got a PhD from the Center for Food Policy in London, and she's also worked as a journalist for over a decade. So Jess, the floor is yours for the final words.
Thanks, Charlotte. Wow, that was a very packed session. 3 very different cities of different sizes in different parts of the world, facing different issues, and with different entry points to their food work. Okay, so I've done my best to capture a few themes that jumped out at me from the presentations and from the discussion. So I'll run through these quite briefly, and Charlotte, please do let me know if I'm taking up too much time. The first is really the theme of empowerment, citizen involvement, and capacity development of populations. I noticed right at the beginning in Leuven, the Kortum Leuven platform places farmers in the driving seat, and this is really crucial. They have ownership of their market mechanism, and they also own the narrative, but they have this support in the shares held by local government. And often we see this shared ownership, shared governance, which means that successful initiatives are not tied to any one administration. And this gives protection in case of electoral change, but also means that the agenda is in the hands of the actual food system stakeholders. I also noticed similarly in Rosario, this protection of spaces through urban planning and the participatory processes of identifying these spaces. Again, this theme of citizen stakeholder central involvement and empowerment with the assistance from the local government in terms of technical assistance, financial opportunities. And in Tana, again, the focus on capacity development of vulnerable stakeholders. The shared vision emphasized by Tokiana in Antananarivo. So multi-stakeholder participation was really a key theme for all the cities. In the comments, Michael Claessens from Canberra mentioned trust, the importance of building trust. And I believe it's really important to do this groundwork in developing a vision like has been done in Antananarivo. So stakeholders may not agree on everything, but there needs to be some core of common understanding, enough in terms of the direction of travel, and for every stakeholder to see themselves reflected in the vision. And through this participatory vision, to really know that you're all on the same page and to find ways of working together and to build trust and overcome some of the barriers. And this was reinforced by Thibaut, making the stronger case for engagement of different stakeholders and different departments when you've got this core of consensus. I was also really interested by the Thibaut's mention in Leuven of the importance of having an economic model at the center of actions. And he said it's an important lesson which is often forgotten, that you need this. You need actions to make economic sense before you can really start to talk about social and environmental benefits. And by way of comparison, I think that the connection comes out really clearly in both Rosario and in Tana, because in Rosario, the driver was economic. It was the economic crisis in 2001, which had social implications, which drove the Urban Agriculture Initiative. And also in Tana, in Antananarivo, boosting income generation activities of vulnerable populations. We can see this link emerging between economic benefits and social benefits, and the ability of stakeholders to put in place actions to boost their adaptive and preventative resilience capacities. I also really noticed that Rosario's Urban Agriculture Programme is a long-running program, and it was born from crisis. Of course, most actions are put in place in response to a problem that's identified. But in the case of Rosario, it was a matter of moving from adaptation in the face of crisis to real transformation and institutionalization into city plans and policies. And this is crucial, and this gives me hope. A lot of hope about cities' ability to respond, to reconfigure, and to do things better. We've seen this in relation to the pandemic. We do know that more climate upheaval is coming, and it's really crucial to capture the lessons, continue the good things that come out of crises, to be able to improve resilience and be able to respond better in the future. The question of national level support. Because the national level changes at the national level can support or wipe out institutional and policy frameworks, as well as be supportive. And there have been some really good answers in the chat. I think there's a lot more work to do on this. I note Thomas Forster's comments in the chat about an emerging coalition for national to local and territorial integration in the wake of the UN Food Systems Summit. This has great potential to help, although I know that the terms of reference for such a mechanism are still being worked out, or the work hasn't quite even started yet. In my opinion, it's important to make sure this is not a technocratic mechanism, that it's very accessible, that there's a real ease of dialogue within national contexts, that it's not top down, but that cities are really able to communicate what they need and to get the support that they need. All three of the cities we heard from today are doing brilliant work on monitoring. They can show real impacts, reduction of temperatures in urban hotspots, the real impact on vulnerable populations. These are crucial, both for continuing engagement and convincing stakeholders within cities, within city governments, and at the national level too. Also for convincing other cities that might be able to put similar actions in place. Joy mentioned the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact Monitoring Framework Handbook and Resource Pack, which she wrote, and also the forthcoming City Region Food System Assessment and Planning Manual and Revised Toolkit coming out at the end of this year. Both of these have been developed with FAO. So I just want to reinforce availability of these resources, which can be really helpful for cities, and also Rikolto and RUAF availability for consultancy in these areas. Coming back to the importance of documentation, I'm just posting in the chat a link to Food Action Cities. It's a platform, an online platform, which has been developed by RUAF with GAIN, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, and the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact Secretariat, for cities to contribute their actions, information on their actions, what their impacts have been, how they've put actions in place, really to share experiences between cities, to share what they've done, also how they've done it. And it's also very important, I think, to identify what kinds of conditions enable these actions and responses to crises, so that we can see what sort of governance needs to be put in place, what contextual factors can help when you're trying to transfer or adapt actions from one place to another. So I think I'll leave it there. I hope I've made some sense in bringing together the three cities. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak, and I'll hand back to you, Charlotte.
Yeah, that was wonderful, Jess. That was a great summary, really connecting the dots, and I think really got the main messages that came out of the discussion. So nothing to add. It was perfect. So just, yeah, I wanted to thank you, you and also all the other speakers that have participated in the discussion today. I think it was a really rich and very much a live discussion. I got a lot of energy from it, and yeah, just a big round of applause to everyone. And I want to encourage you also to have a look at the program of the Recipes for Resilience event during COP26. There will be plenty of other discussions like the one we've had today, and you might find a topic that you're really interested in. So have a look, and thank you again for joining. So bye everyone.